Introduce the book. Hi guys, tonight we'll be talking to Alison Belsham about a new book, The Embalmer. At the minute, she's having a few technical issues. Hello, Alison.
Hello there.
Hi.
I'm here.
We're live now. If you could introduce the book for us, please, Alison.
I will do that. So my new book, which came out last week, is called The Embalmer. It's the third book in the Tattoo Thief Trilogy. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that. The Tattoo Thief Trilogy is a series of books set in Brighton, and it's the main character is Detective Inspector Francis Sullivan. He's a very young, clean-cut detective inspector, not like the usual stereotype of the middle-aged policeman who's sort of drinks too much and is divorced and cynical. He's at the start of his career, at the beginning of these books, and he meets up with a tattoo artist called Mullins, who helps in the first case in The Tattoo Thief. By the time we get to The Embalmer, which is the third book, they are, I should say, firm friends. They have a slightly on and off relationship, and of course there's a new murder that kicks off the book. A body's discovered in an Egyptian sarcophagus in the Museum of Natural History in Brighton, and it's not supposed to be there. It's not one of the displays. Someone has put it there, and when they look inside, they discover someone has been mummified, and it's not an ancient Egyptian person. So their first problem is finding out who the body belongs to, and then the second problem is finding out who's done it, who's done this appalling thing. Of course, then the bodies start to stack up and they don't have any idea who it is, but the case becomes personal. The killer clearly knows who Francis is and starts sending sort of little personal messages. And, of course, it's hugely frustrating for Francis. He's, as usual, tied up in the problems that Marnie Mullins has with her own family and things going on there. And suddenly he's racing against the clock to sort out two huge problems. So that's the kind of basic premise of the book.
Why did you decide to base it in Brighton, given that you live in Edinburgh? Why did you choose Brighton?
Well, when I first started the very first one, The Tattoo Thief, I was living in London, and I had no idea that I was going to suddenly move to Edinburgh. But I've never actually lived in Brighton, but I really like Brighton, and they have a fantastic tattoo convention every year. And I went to the tattoo convention there, and in fact I had part of my tattoo was finished off actually at the Brighton Tattoo Convention. So when I started thinking about a story that would be set in the world of tattooing, Brighton just seemed like the ideal place. I had the tattoo convention there. There are loads of tattoo shops. It's such a sort of bohemian place that it just seemed to be the perfect setting. Then, of course, I moved to Edinburgh, and every research trip was a kind of great long trek back south. But yeah, I'm not going to complain because I love spending time there. So
I must admit, as a reviewer, I like to go on research trips and events as well. So I get the thrill of that. You said that you also like to do book events yourself. Have you? Because I believe that the idea for it was pitched at Bloody Scotland.
Yes, that's right. So I'll tell you what happened with the idea from the start. When I got my tattoo it was 2015 in the autumn, I found a tattoo artist that I liked, and he was based in Berlin. So I flew out to Berlin, and I had a long 5-hour session on the Saturday getting tattooed. And that night, when I was lying in bed in the hotel, I couldn't sleep. I was so excited to have my tattoo, and I lay there and I thought, I've got my tattoo now. This is so fantastic. No one can take it away from me. And then I thought, yeah, what if someone tried to take it away? What if someone tried to steal my tattoo? And immediately I knew that that was like the idea for a crime book. So I I spoke to my tattoo artist the next day. I went for another session of tattooing to carry on with it, and I chatted with my tattoo artist. I said, "What about this for an idea for a crime?" And he absolutely loved it. So I came home and I started working on the plot, and it was at that point I discovered that there was a pitching competition at the bloody Scotland Crime Writing Festival. I never even knew there were crime writing festivals then. I'd never been to one. I saw a little thing on Facebook saying, send 100 words about your novel and then you can pitch and you'll get some feedback from editors and agents. And of course, feedback is like gold dust from, professional feedback. It's really hard to come by. So I thought, right, I'll write 100 words about this novel that at the moment only exists in my brain. And I sent it off and I forgot all about it because, like all these things, you think there are going to be hundreds of people applying to this. So I didn't have high expectations. And I got an email back saying, could you come up to Stirling and pitch your novel in front of the panel live? Yes, of course I could. You're never going to say no to that. So I flew up to Glasgow, got the train to Stirling. I was so terrified. I'd never done any public speaking at all in my life. I'd never stood up in front of an audience, and Pitch Perfect at that point was in the ballroom of the hotel in Stirling. I can't remember the name of the hotel, but where they have bloody Scotland. It was in the ballroom and there was a huge audience and I had to stand up and pitch my novel. It was the most frightening thing I'd ever done. And it was also the most shocking thing because I actually won the pitch and the panel said unanimously, we love this book. How fantastic. How much of it have you written? And of course I hadn't written any. Everyone else who'd pitched was like, oh, finished, the book is finished, it's ready for submission. I hadn't written any of it. So I told a lie at that point. I said I've written 1,000 words because I thought I can easily just quickly write that if anyone actually asks to see it. So it was a massive shock to me, and it in fact completely turned my life around because through that I got an agent, Jenny Brown, who's like the world's most brilliant agent, and then a little while later I got a publishing deal with Orion, and so it really changed my life. And if I hadn't seen that thing on Facebook, I often wonder now, if I'd never seen that thing and I'd never entered that competition, what would have happened? I mean, I would have written the book and I hoped that it would have got picked up somewhere along the way, but bloody Scotland actually really changed my life. It was amazing.
When you were coming up with the idea, how important was talking to your tattoo artists and people you know in the industry?
It was very important because I'm not a tattooist or anything like that, and I knew that I wanted to write a character who was a tattoo artist, and I knew that I had to get that right. The sort of little technical details and just the sort of stuff about the tattooing community. So I spoke to my tattoo artist a lot after that. He tattooed me for 25 hours, and for those 25 hours, I just cross-questioned him about everything to do with tattoos. So it was really important. And all the time, whilst writing all 3 books, I still often went to conventions and events and stuff. So
embalming is something which is completely different to the tattooing side. What made you decide to use embalming as the end of the series?
Because the first book was about someone who stole tattoos and cut them off the bodies, and the second book was about a killer who used poison ink and tattooed people with poison ink to kill them. And I knew that the whole trilogy features tattoos, but I had to come up with something that was different and potentially even more interesting and fascinating. And for some reason, I saw something somewhere about canopic jars, which are these jars the Egyptians used to store the body parts in. And I just thought, oh God, a killer who's like using, canopic jars, mummification. It's a kind of equally fascinating thing, and it seemed to kind of go. It's not the same as tattooing, but it seemed to go with it. And of course, the body that they find within the sarcophagus has got tattoos all over. There are tattoos all over the body, which you know, they have to work out the meaning of these tattoos. So there's still tattooing involved, but the embalming, it was such an interesting thing to research, how the Egyptians embalm bodies, and it is quite horrible and gory, and it is included in the book. So
when you read it out at Noir at the Bar's Halloween special, it was a little bit of a surprise how gory it was. What was it? What was it like reading it out?
It was kind of all right reading it out, because having written it, I'm like sort of inured to it now. I'm quite used to it now. So, you know, it didn't kind of freak me out too much. But when I was writing it, and I had to write the stuff about, you know, the kind of, what they do with the brain and stuff. And it was just like, ugh. And I did have a slightly more graphic description, and my editor made me take it out, because it was just, she said, like, everyone will be sick reading this book if you keep it in. So it is just, it's a kind of really, it's a really unpleasant and horrible process, the embalming process, particularly the way the ancient Egyptians did it. And yeah, fascinating to write about.
And of course, reading it out was important for me as well, because I'm listening to it on audiobook. And before the interview tonight, you were telling us that you've got a relationship with the narrator that's a bit unusual.
It is, yes. So when the Tattoo Thief was approaching publication, Orion said to me, right, we're going to make an audio book, an audio version of it. And I thought, fantastic, this is great. And they said, we've found someone who can do the audio, who can narrate the book. So I said, fine. And they said, we'll send you a clip of her narrating something so you can hear what her voice is like and just see if you like it. And they sent me a clip of an actress narrating, and her name is Candida Gubbins. And I thought, I know that name. It's not a name that you forget, and it's not a name that is likely to, it's not like there are going to be hundreds of people with that name. So I thought, I know that name. And I went back to Orion and I said, by the way, I think I was at college with Candida, so it'd be fantastic if she narrates the book. And they said to me, would you like to come and visit her in the studio then and see her doing some of the narration? Yeah, of course I would. That was a great idea. So I went down to London and I went to visit the studio where she was doing the narration. One of the girls at Orion took me in there and I said, Candida, hey, hello, how are you? And she looked at me and they hadn't told her. So I'd told them that I knew her, but they hadn't told her. And she didn't recognise my name because, of course, since I knew her, I'd got married. So my name was different. Her name was the same. So I walked in and her face, her jaw hit the floor. And she's like, oh, my God, Alison. And it was like 30 years since we had seen each other. And we'd been at college together on a secretarial course. Between school and university, my mother made me learn to type, which I hated at the time, but was clearly a fantastic thing to have made me do. The same with her. Her mother made her go on this course because, girls, typing is so useful, because if your university careers don't work out and you don't get jobs, you can just be secretaries. We had no intention of just being secretaries, either of us, but we learned to type, which was brilliant. And we actually used to skive off quite a lot of the time and go and sit in the park smoking cigarettes and stuff like that. So then we lost touch, and now we're back in touch and great friends again. And she's reading my audiobooks, and that's absolutely fantastic. So it's a thrill for me.
And you were saying that you're really interested in listening to it, because in this one there's 3 different narrators, which is a bit unusual considering that normally it's just one.
Yes, the first 2 books it's just Candida doing the narration, and then for this 3rd book, the people at Orion said, look, we'd like to use more voices to give it more of a kind of, I suppose, more dramatic edge if you have three different voices for 3 different points of views. So they've included 2 other actors as well as Candida. So I haven't listened to it yet, so I'm really interested to hear that. I heard the little snippets of the guys who've been involved, and they sounded great for the characters that they were reading. And so I'm intrigued to see what they've done with it. It sounds great, I think.
The third voice, which is a bit smaller, it's very sinister, which is a good thing because you need sinister voices.
With the voice of the killer.
Yeah, very sinister and very useful because it allows for different flavour altogether. When you're writing a series, though, what's it? The arc of a 3-book series, because you know it's going to finish. That must have been a bit more complicated than just writing a standalone.
It was quite complicated because so in the 3 books they can be read as standalones because they each have a murder case and a different murderer that Frances has to track down. But what holds them together is this overarching story about Marnie Mullins, the tattoo artist. And in the first book, we learn that she's got a very dark past. Something's happened in her past that makes her distrust the police, and she's quite a damaged character. But you don't learn entirely why in the first book. There are just references to something that happened in the past, and then over the 3 books, you gradually learn more and more about her story. And of course, the awful thing that happened in her past, by the time the 3rd book comes around, it rears its ugly head again, and it becomes a major part of the story of the 3rd book. So it's quite complicated to write, and especially because when I was writing the first book, I didn't have a great plan for 3 books right from the start. I planned out the first book, and then the publisher said, by the way, could this be a series? Could you keep it going? And then you suddenly start to think, right, how can I make this work? And how can I make this story continue over the course of 3 books? So it was quite complicated, but I think it gives it a bit more resonance, a bit more depth, so that there's this ongoing story, and the ongoing story of the relationship between Frances and Marnie as well, that develops and grows over the 3 books. And I got very fond of those 2 characters, of course, over that space of time writing them.
I must admit, one of the most interesting things that I found when I've been reading but books 2 and 3 was your concluding parts, because you seem to write those very dramatically. Was it hard to do that, or did it come naturally?
Well, what I've tried to do with all 3 of the books is to have a kind of huge action piece for the ending, and it's kind of the thing I look forward to writing the most. It's like the whole story is building towards whatever the huge bit of the ending is. So in book 2, there's a chase in the sewers of Brighton, and I went down into the sewers. There's you can go on a sewers tour. There are the Victorian sewers underneath Brighton, which is the most amazing piece of structural engineering, and you can go on a tour. And so I thought, right, I'm going to write a scene down in these sewers. I better go on the tour, which is really thoroughly unpleasant and vile, and sewers really smell horrible. And what was quite interesting to me was that there were like 20 people on the tour. And I'm like, right, okay, so I'm one person and I'm on this tour for research because I'm writing a book. And I'm thinking, why are 19 other people wanting to go into the sewers? I literally couldn't understand that at all, because it's really unpleasant down there. It's horrible. But so that was the idea. And I'd always then the embalmer, without giving away any spoilers, there's a big scene that takes place in the Brighton Pavilion. And I had very much on purpose saved that for the 3rd book. It would have been quite obvious to do some scenes in the pavilion early on with the 1st and the 2nd book. And I thought, no, I'm going to save that. That's the most iconic building in Brighton. And I thought, all right, I'm going to save that for my 3rd finale, which I did. And yeah, those are the bits I really love writing the most, the kind of big action finish.
When dealing with the family dynamics of Francis and things, because his sister's got some problems,
Yeah.
Did you have to do any special research for that?
I have to say, because she's a smaller character, I didn't do a massive amount. I did a bit of reading and, yeah, a little bit of research, but because she's not, you know, the main protagonist or anything, I didn't do a huge amount of research for that. So,
Yeah.
but enough to make sure I knew. And I did have the books. I have a friend who's a doctor who reads the books for me, and so anything like that, any conditions that the characters have, because Marnie Mullins herself is type 1 diabetic, and also then any injuries and then subsequent hospital treatments and so on, and particularly in the second book when people were being poisoned and how that would affect them and how they would die of poisoning and stuff. So I have a doctor who checks out all of my sort of medical facts and sets me straight when I go wrong. So
how did you get in contact with them? Was it just like?
Oh, I've lost the sound, Alex.
Yeah. How did you get in contact
I
with
can't
them?
hear you.
Oh,
Hello?
lost Sam. We lost Sam, which is I don't know what we can do about it.
Can hear you.
No,
Alex,
she can't hear us.
I can't hear you.
If you could message Sam for us.
Hi, Alex and Alison. Can you hear me, Alison? No. Can I ask you
Shall I go out and
to
come back
refresh?
in?
Yes, please. That would be great. Thank you. Alex, tell me what you thought of Alison's book.
I think that as a trilogy, it really works. As trilogies, it's the only one that I've read so far that has been a pure trilogy. I mean, you get police procedurals, but working it out as an arc of 3 books is all different.
Right. Sorry, I lost the sound and I couldn't hear you.
It's all right. Me and Sam were just discussing why I found
I've
the
still
books
lost the
so
sound.
different. We're just saying about the arc of 3 books is very different to the norm. Is there anyone that you read that might have given you that idea, or was it?
Oh, so the Orange Prize, yes. So that was a screenwriting prize that used to run quite a long time ago. Can't remember what it was, probably in the early 2000s. I did for a time want to be a screenwriter, and I learned how to write screenplays, and I wrote a few screenplays, and I entered one of my screenplays for the Orange Prize, which for the person who won, it would be getting their screenplay made into a film. And I didn't win, but the script was highly commended, which was fantastic, and it was a great experience. But I learned quite quickly that very few screenplays are ever made into films, because making a film costs such a huge amount of money. So even if you're a competent screenwriter, your chances of having your work produced are still quite small. And so after kind of banging on that door for a while, I thought, right, I think I'll write novels, and hopefully I can do that and gain some success. So that was why I changed to novels.
But you've got an idea which wasn't within the trilogy.
Embalmer is a very dark book. Yes, so if you enjoy dark books, there's a sort of slight horror element to it because of the way the killer, the mummification and the use of the Coptic jars. Yeah, it's quite a dark read, and if you're squeamish, you might not like it too much. But if you like your horror, it's probably a good book for you to read.
If it's a horror-based thing, who would you say was your inspiration as a reader when you were?
I think, yeah. Would I like to do a cameo on my own audiobooks? Yes. Yeah, I'd love to, actually. I hadn't ever thought of it, but I'd like to. And I suppose if I want to do that, I should write a character that might be suitable for me to voice. So I don't know that I could have done that that I would have been suitable for anyone in The Tattoo Thief or The Embalmer. But maybe maybe at some future point I'll write a character that would be my voice. So
yeah, I think Sam's just put another one alongside there. Yeah.
Oh, I don't read books like that. I don't read any horror books. They're too scary for me. So you know, when it comes to crime, I kind of like even get a bit scared reading books like Joe Nesbo and things like that. And so I really like to write things that are kind of vicious and horrible and gruesome and grim, but I don't actually like to read them. I get too scared because I live on my own, and it's like, oh my god, no, that's just too scary. So
if you do end up being scary, do you write at certain times in the day to make you more comfortable with the writing?
So someone says they just downloaded the book from NetGalley, so thank you very much for doing that, and I really hope you enjoy it. Yeah, it's still available on NetGalley for anyone who's able to download from NetGalley. It's still up there, so that would be great. Go ahead.
If there's anybody out there that's looking to write, what advice would you give them?
Do I write at certain times of the day? Yes, I do. I write mostly in the afternoons. I tend to do more boring sort of chores and other bits and pieces in the morning. I tend to keep the afternoons free for writing, and I don't write in the evenings, but that's just because I'm a bit lazy and I get tired. Not so much that I would be creeped out, but yeah, it's like a sort of solid, if I can do 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock every day writing, then I'm happy.
Does that kind of routine help you out in working out the pacing for the book?
I think the most important advice for wannabe writers is bum on the seat. You've got to write the book. You can't ever get anything published if it's not written. So I think it's all about diligence, but I also think it's about learning your craft as a writer. If you picked up a violin and wanted to play, you wouldn't get straight into a concert hall to play. You would practice for years and years and years. And I think that's what writers need to do. You need to write and write and write and write and practice. And most writers write several books before they're published. So don't get discouraged by, you know, that if your first book doesn't get picked up immediately, don't get discouraged. It is perseverance. It's the thing you need most as a writer. I wrote for years and years before I was published, and most published writers I know would tell you the same thing. So just do it. Just write hard and read as much as you can in your chosen genre, and read a lot of books about writing. Stephen King in particular has written a brilliant book about writing. It's called On Writing, and read that because it will inspire you and tell you an awful lot about what it's like to be a writer.
When you started as a writer, you were doing another career as a copywriter. Did that give you any hints on how to construct anything, or is that completely different in style?
So because I've lost the sound, I'm just reading the questions from the side. So I hope I'm answering the question you just asked me, Alex. But does routine help you out with working out the pace of a book? When it comes to writing a book, I work out the whole story in advance. I'm very much a plotter, and I work out all the details, every single chapter. Before I start writing anything, I know exactly what's going to go in every single chapter. And what it means is that when I sit down to write every day, I know exactly what I'm writing and where that scene has got to go and what I've got to include in it. And it means then that I can just kind of get on with writing without having to pause and kind of work out what happens next. It's all worked out beforehand. I know some writers find that a good way. Other writers go by the seat of their pants and just start writing and see where it takes them, but I don't think I could do that.
Yeah, I think Sam's just got the next question. So I think Alison's one behind me. Yeah.
Do you want?
She can't hear us.
Assuming that this is, do you have writer friends that you discuss your ideas with? Yes, I do. I've got lots of writer friends that I discuss my ideas with.
That's what I'm saying.
I'm a member of a writing group, which we meet once every couple of months, and then we critique each other's work. We send in several pages of whatever we're writing on, and then we critique each other's work. And I've learned an awful lot by doing that. I've learned an awful lot from what they say about my work. But I've also learned an immense amount about writing by critiquing other people's work and looking at it and working out why certain things work, why certain things are good, why other things don't work very well. And I would say that's really important for anyone who wants to be a writer, is join a writing group, find some people, like-minded writers. You don't have to write in the same genre. It can be useful, but in my group, we're writing in different genres, and that's also interesting. You learn a lot from people writing different things. So, it's absolutely critical, I think, for writers to network with other writers.
What would you say you've learned most from other genres? I think Sam can pick that up. Sam can. Yeah. I think just right now.
So when I started as a writer, I was, I assume this is a question about was I a copywriter? I was a copywriter, and I've been a copywriter for about 25 years now. So I think, I've written sort of every working day because that's what I do for a living, and that made a big difference to being a writer, because it means I'm used to just sitting down and writing. I don't wait for a muse. You can't do that when you write professionally. I'm very used to sitting down and just getting on and writing. And it also made a big difference in working with my editor, because for years and years I've had clients and I write stuff for them and they come back to me and say, no, could you change this? No, we need this in it. Could you include that or leave that out? And it means I can take notes, and so now when an editor says to me, can you make this character bigger or change this or change that, it will make the story better. I can see that. I can see that, other people's input is something that I'm grateful for, and it makes it much easier working with an editor, and it really helps. So, yeah.
Given that you work well with editors, what's the biggest piece of advice you've been given by your editor while you've been writing?
So if I could live somewhere for a year while I wrote a book set there, where would I go? I think probably Italy. I love Italy. I love Tuscany, and I would love to write a book set there. I think I'd definitely love to live there for a year at any rate. So yeah, that would be it.
What would you say is the most memorable moment as a writer so far?
Right, do I have book covers to show, and could I tell you about them? Yes, I do. Okay, so the first book in the trilogy is The Tattoo Thief, and it's in this book that we first meet Francis Sullivan and Marnie Mullins. And I'll read you the paragraph from the back, and then it will let you know how the whole trilogy starts off. When Brighton tattoo artist Marnie Mullins discovers a flayed body, newly promoted DI Francis Sullivan needs her help. There's a serial killer at large, slicing tattoos from his victims' bodies while they're still alive. Marnie knows the tattooing world like the back of her hand, but has her own reasons to distrust the police. So when she identifies the killer's next target, will she tell Sullivan or go after the tattoo thief alone? So that's the first book in the series. The second book in the series is Her Last Breath, and there's another killer on the loose in Brighton in this book. And this time, the first victim is the girlfriend of Marnie's son, Alex. And this, of course, makes him a suspect immediately. And Francis isn't so sure, but he has to find the killer. And so that sort of, it becomes a race to find the killer, because someone is going around Brighton and grabbing young girls, tattooing them, letting them go, and they're still alive, and then they die a few days later, and the police actually work out that the killer is using poison ink in the tattoos. And so Francis has to work out who's doing it and why, and what is the message in these poisoned tattoos that he's putting on these poor girls. So that's book 2. And then the third book in the series is the new one, The Embalmer. And I have to say I really love this cover of this one. I think it's so bold and it stands out so well. I'm so thrilled that they gave me this wonderful cover. So this is the third one. We're still in Brighton, and D.I. Sullivan is not quite so young and fresh-faced as he was, and he's becoming slightly more cynical about the job. You see over the progression of the books, from the very keen and eager, just newly promoted DI, and by the third book he's a little more measured and, as I say, a little more cynical. And he's put on the case to find out about this mummified body. Who is she? Why has someone done this to her? And what's his connection to Francis? Because suddenly it all becomes very personal. So that's the third book. That's the third. And now I'm working on something new. So.
Her Last Breath
Right,
wasn't
so
the
I'm
original
just working out
title.
what question we've got to.
What was it like coming up with that title? And how many titles did they bat around before they came up with that one?
I can't hear what Alex is saying, so I don't know if I'm answering the right question. But the biggest piece of advice that I've had from my editor when I've been writing is, she said to me once, she said, Alison, should take your characters, do something really horrible to them, and then do something even worse, and then make them suffer some more. So it's like when you think you've done something to your characters, you've got to, do something again, do something else, lay it on thicker and thicker and thicker, put them into more and more predicaments. And then, that's what will excite the readers. And it's been great advice, and I follow that advice. So, what has been my most memorable moment as an author so far? I think it still has to be winning Pitch Perfect at Bloody Scotland, because that changed my life, that moment. And it's like these sort of shows you see on television where people get up and do something, and the winner, for me it was literally, it's not a guaranteed prize that you get an agent or a publishing deal if you win Bloody Scotland, if you win Pitch Perfect, but for me that was the outcome, and it was just an extraordinary moment, and I will never forget it ever. So that was fantastic. So I don't know, what do you find fascinating about tattoos? So I always wanted to have a tattoo, although I didn't get my tattoo until I was 50. I always wanted a tattoo, and the reason for this was that my grandfather was a submariner, and he went out to China in the 1930s or 1920s, I think it was, out to Shanghai with the British Navy in a submarine. And while he was out there, he got 2 sleeve tattoos done in China, which were dragons, and they were amazing. So when I was a child, my brother and I would always say, you know, Grandpa, show us your tattoos. And he would roll up his sleeves, and there were these beautifully brightly coloured dragons on either arm. And so ever since that, you know, then I wanted a tattoo. But of course, when I was growing up, girls didn't have tattoos, and it was very frowned upon. And it's only in more recent years that it seems okay for women to have tattoos. And I suddenly, you know, having wanted one for so long, I reached 50, and it was like, shit, if I don't do it now, when am I going to do it? So I went and got my tattoo, which was brilliant. And I love it very much, so I'm thrilled about it. What did I write before the trilogy? I wrote all sorts of things. I wrote, as it's spoken about already, I wrote several screenplays, which never quite got anywhere. I wrote a long sex and shopping book, as they used to be called, the Jackie Collins type books. I wrote one about a rock star, and various other books that should never see the light of day, in fact. So I think the less said about them, the better. How did you manage swapping between copywriting and fiction? I suppose it's not that difficult, because it's I still do a bit of copywriting from time to time for some of my old clients, and it's just like, because I'm very organised and I always know what I'm writing. You know, with the fiction, it's all, as I say, it's all plotted out. So if I happen to be copywriting, it's the same thing. I plan quite carefully what I need to write, what I need to include in the copy, and yeah, it's not hard to swap between them. Even on the same day, I can swap between them. So it's just, I suppose, different parts of my brain, maybe. I don't know. Will the trilogy be extended further? I don't know at the moment. There's definitely scope for Francis Sullivan to develop further, and there are definitely places and murders in Brighton that are waiting to be written about. So I don't know yet. I'm currently working on a couple of other projects. I'm working on a book with my brother set in Afghanistan. He was out in Afghanistan for 4 years, and we're writing together a book called Death in Kabul, which is a police procedural set in Afghanistan, featuring a military policeman and an Afghan policeman who are thrown together working on solving a murder. So in fact, that's finished now, and that's out on submission, and that could potentially become a series of 3 books. And I've just started writing a new book set in Edinburgh, which is set in the fire service. So the main protagonist is a fire investigator in this book, which, you know, is a little bit different from police procedural, because the investigations all take place in fire scenes, and I've staged a pretty spectacular, not literally, just in the book, a pretty spectacular fire in the centre of Edinburgh, and my character then has to investigate it and find out exactly what happened. So that's the new character, and hopefully that will potentially grow into a series as well. So, right, so Brighton is at the other end of the country. Has that made research tricky? Yeah, yes, to an extent, because I have to travel down there if I want to go and do some research. But of course, it's quite lovely to go down to a seaside town in the south of the country for a few days and have a bit of a break there and do some research. Research trips are always great because they get you away from the computer screen. And, you know, I love it. As I say, I've been down in the sewers in Brighton. I had a special tour of the pavilion. I've been up the I-360, which is this massive viewing tower where you can, you go up in this sort of viewing platform that goes up, I don't know, meters and meters. You can see for miles around, and it's quite stunning. And so all the locations in the book I've researched, and it's kind of one of the most fun things about it. So that's been great. what was the first book event I was invited to? Oh, I'm trying to think. So after I did Pitch Perfect and got the publishing deal, then what did I do? I went to Harrogate. So Orion invited me to Harrogate just before The Tattoo Thief was published, and I was in a quiz, and I met lots of other writers. The Harrogate Crime Writing Festival is I think the highlight of the crime writing year, highlight of the crime writing calendar, along with Bloody Scotland, of course. And the atmosphere there is fantastic. And so I was invited there just before The Tattoo Thief was published, and I thought, oh my God, this is what I want from now on. I just loved it so much, and meeting all the other crime writers and becoming friends with them, which has gone on, and it's something that I love going back to every year. So I believe you work in a library part-time. Do you sign the copies of your books? No, I don't. I do. I go and work in the library. I don't work for the library. I write in a library sometimes, not now with COVID, of course, but I go and work in the library as opposed to working for the library. But I go to the National Library up in the Old Town in Edinburgh and go and sit in there and write, because it gets me out of my flat. The trouble with being a writer is you can get cabin fever very easily. And that's why I think a lot of writers work in cafes as well. And also it's very easy when you're at home to get distracted by other things. And there are times when I think, right, I really need to concentrate on my writing. And then I go and sit in the National Library and write, because everyone is in there and everyone's really quiet and working really hard. And it helps focus with the concentration. And would I sign my books in there? I don't think they have my books in there. It's all sort of non-fiction and academic books and sort of weighty tomes from Victorian times and stuff like that. So I don't think my books are even in there. Or if they are, they're just lurking in a dark cellar in a dark corner, never to see the light of day. So I didn't get to sign them. That would probably be, yeah, you'd probably get in trouble if you signed a library book, I think. So, do you ever seek professional advice over elements of your books? I do, massively. So in the first book, obviously I spoke to my tattoo artists in particular, but other tattoo artists as well. And I have a retired policeman, retired superintendent, who reads the books for police procedural things. And as I've said, also I have a friend who's a doctor. But in my new series on the fire investigator, I've been talking to a retired fireman and a fire investigator and a lecturer in fire investigation, because that's a really, it's a, you know, I didn't realise when I kind of thought what a great idea for a book. It's actually quite technical, that I need to get it right, although I don't want to write a sort of how-to manual about fire investigation. At the same time, I need to make the details realistic and get it right, how they work out where the fire has started and whether it's arson or not and things like that. And it's one of the most fascinating things, the chance to talk to people who do some career that you literally have no idea about, you've never thought about. It's one of the, you know, one of the kind of really good parts about writing is that sitting down with someone and just asking them about their job and what they do and their career and stuff. So that's been really, really fascinating. What's the best place that you've seen either of your books, real life or pictures sent? One thing I love, so the Tattoo Thief has been published now in 15 different languages. One of the things I really love to see is people from other countries send pictures of the book and holding the book and whatever. And it's been published in the Czech Republic, and the Czech readers do the most brilliant Instagram posts with it. And they all, a lot of the readers have tattoos. It's obviously, clearly it appeals to people with tattoos to read about them. And then they do these sort of posts where they're holding bloody knives and they're holding the book and they're like pretending to do something awful to themselves. And it's just, when I see them say, oh my God, it's just that they've taken so much trouble to do these posts. And, you know, you see a lot of pictures of other books that are kind of arranged with lovely flowers and cups of coffee and stuff like that. And that's lovely. But then when you see someone's gone to all the trouble to kind of fake up this injury and bloody knives all around the book and stuff like that, you're going to think, oh my God. It's just, please don't take it too seriously. But I love to see those. It's great. So, would you make a graphic novel version of one of your books? Do you know, I'd love to see a graphic novel version. Clearly, I couldn't do it because I can't draw, but I would really, really love it if they did a graphic version of The Tattoo Thief. Because, yeah, I would even love an illustrated version, because in The Tattoo Thief there are so many tattoos described in detail, because all the different, it talks a lot about the different styles of tattooing and stuff like that. And an illustrated version or a graphic novel of it would just be amazing. And what was really nice to see was there's a Japanese edition of it, and when they did the cover, they've got about 3 or 4 different covers which have different tattoos on the cover, and when I saw them I was just so thrilled by that. It was lovely to see. So yeah, I mean, because of the subject matter, I think it would really lend itself to a graphic novel. That would be fantastic. So, who are your favourite authors? I call them my shut up and take my money authors, the ones that you'll just read because the author's name is on the cover. It's interesting, they're not necessarily crime authors, actually. I mean, my favourite author of all time is John Irving, the American writer, who's very much like a sort of modern Dickens. In the books are sprawling, and there are lots of characters, and there's huge sort of social and political content to them as well, and you just get drawn in and you read them, and you know, I love his books. And I like so many books. I mean, if you want to say who's my favourite crime writer, I think is John D. MacDonald, who wrote the Travis McGee series. But I'm also a huge Michael Connolly fan, who wrote Bosch and the Lincoln Lawyer books, which are absolutely my favourite. And I really love Scott Turow books, the sort of courtroom dramas. I would love to write a courtroom drama at some point. So that's a sort of ambition for the future. So, how far in advance was the trilogy planned? When I went to bloody Scotland, I had just got the plan for one book, and one of the questions from the panel was, could this be a series? And of course I said yes. I think I actually just said yes, it's a trilogy, and then it was, and so then I had to sit down and actually plan it out. So I started, you know, the first book was planned out, but it wasn't written. It meant I could slightly adjust that as I needed to, as I started to think about what the ongoing stories would be. The standalone elements, which are the main murder stories, it wasn't so important for they didn't have to match, because they're standalone stories where the murder happens and by the end of the book Francis solves it. But it took more planning. The story about Marnie and her dark past, I don't want to give any spoilers away, that took more planning to spread that out over the 3 books, and to bring it in as to having some closure for her in that story of what had happened in her previous life. So that took a lot more planning. Any news on the novel that you're writing? I'm not quite sure which novel that question is referring to, so maybe we could get more clarification on that question. In addition to the tattooing, any interesting piercings? No, only my ears. That's the only, and I'm, yeah, no, it's not kind of a thing that I'm so interested in, and in fact sometimes, yeah, it's I'm fascinated by tattoos, but body piercing isn't my thing at all. So, you know, each to his own, though. Will Mullins and Sullivan 4 be out next year? No, I'm sorry. I'm writing something else now. I think there is potential for more books with Mullins and Sullivan, but I also need to have some time with some fresh characters as well. I think, you know, I think you want to kind of like mix things up a bit. So as I say, I've started on this new series set in Edinburgh, and my new character, the fire inspector, Erica Wolf, she's called, and she's a fire investigator, and she's a very interesting character. So I'm having a lot of fun with her now. So what was the last novel I read? Well, the last novel I read was by David Bishop, and it was called City of Vengeance. He won Pitch Perfect in, I think, 2018, and he got a publishing deal. It's a historical crime novel, and it comes out in, I think it's February off the top of my head. And I'm very lucky when you become a writer, you luckily get given books to read in advance of publication. And I've just read it, and it's so fantastic. When I heard him pitch it, I was like, oh my God, I can't wait to read it. And then it's taken a little while to sort of reach the point it has. That's the publishing industry for you. But I would really recommend it. So anyone who likes historical crime, I totally recommend it. It's a brilliant book, really, really brilliant book. So that's what I read last. Do you write in silence, or do you have music playing in the background? I write in silence, absolute silence. I can't, if there's music, I can't write. If there's anyone else in the room, I can't write. You know, these are all excuses to procrastinate and to not write, in fact. But yeah, no, I like to have absolute silence, because I kind of like to hear the words in my mind. And if, you know, if there's some music with someone singing, you know, then the lyrics interrupt what I'm trying to formulate. So yeah, I write in silence. Do you have a daily writing routine? Yeah, as I said before, I write in the afternoons mostly, from about 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock is a good chunk of time. And I find that I don't want to write particularly more than that, because it's very tiring, and it's very, it takes a lot of concentration, and I'm quite a lazy person, so that's quite enough for me. So, how long did it take you to get your first publishing deal? All of my life. I wanted to be a writer from when I was a child, and I started writing when I left university. I started writing my first book, and I got an agent, but the book didn't sell and it didn't go anywhere, and then that agent retired, and then that carried on. I'm not going to tell you how many years that is, because it's too many years, but that's I think that's the story for most writers. You just write and write and write until someone finally one day picks up a book and they say, this is an amazing debut book. And you think, no, it's like my 5th book or something. So I've always wanted it. So yeah, it took a long time. But then once I did Pitch Perfect, it was very quick after doing Pitch Perfect. When I won Pitch Perfect, boom, I got an agent. Boom, I got a publishing deal. And that's why that was such an exciting thing to happen to me. So someone says they remember meeting me at Morecambe and Vice, but I don't know who that is, so I can't say if I remember meeting you, because it just says Facebook user, so I'm sorry about that. Looks like we're winding up.
Thanks so much, Alison, for giving us such an interesting hour, and thanks for patiently reading the questions off the side as well. Thank you for such an interesting hour.